here's this wonderful story. A fleeing criminal, desperate to escape the police, runs into the desert with hardly any water. Very soon, he runs out of drinking water, and hours later, he's still plodding under the merciless desert sun. He's close to desperation when suddenly he sees far off in the distance something. Hoping against hope that it's water, he starts running toward what he thinks is an oasis, only to find a little old man with a little stand and an umbrella full of ties. "Hey, do you have water?" pants the criminal. The old man said, "I've already finished my water, but would you like to buy a tie? They're only $5. The criminal shouts, "Do I look like I need a tie? I should kill you right here, but I have to find some water first." The little old man said, "There's no call for threats, but even though you don't want to buy one of my ties and you treat me like this, I'll help you. If you continue over that hill for about 3 miles, you'll find a restaurant with great food and all the ice water you can drink. Good luck." Muttering in disgust, the criminal staggered away over the hill. Several hours later, the other man sees him crawling on the dune back towards him. When he finally arrives, the criminal lays on his back panting. "Everything okay?" asks the tie salesman as he bends over to hear the raspy whisper of the other man. "They won't let me in without a tie." That is so sick, but it's so funny. The whole idea that if you really knew what you needed, you would have been prepared for it. Well, here's a point where Jesus knows what is needed, but he waits. He waits. He's only 2 miles from Bethany. And this gospel passage mentions, because it really picks up on the gospel we heard last week, where you had the man who was born blind and Jesus heals him. And so here are people saying, couldn't he have done, he cured that man who was born blind, couldn't he have done something to keep this one from dying? And there you go. And it connects this gospel with the other gospels. When Jesus says, "I am the resurrection and the life," he raises the dead. When he says, "I am the light of the world," he gives sight to the blind. He shows that he can do what he says he's going to do. Now, there's this wonderful quote from Chesterton. By the way, you might wind up with a slightly shorter homily or slightly longer one. What happened is my printer didn't work at my house office, so I sent ahead my sermon to my email here. It did not arrive. But I was able to save this quote by looking it up again from Chesterton. He says this: Okay. This is the closing to his book, Orthodoxy. He says, "As I close this chaotic volume, I open again the strange small book from which all Christianity came, and I am haunted by the kind of confirmation. The tremendous figure of Christ, which fills the Gospels, towers in this respect." Now he's talking about joy. He's talking in reference to joy. He says, "This tremendous figure, the Christ, which fills the Gospels, towers in this respect, as in every other, above all the thinkers who ever thought themselves tall. His pathos was natural, almost casual. The Stoics, ancient and modern, were proud of concealing their tears. He never concealed his tears. He showed them plainly on his open face at any daily sight, such as the far sight of his native city, which he wept over among the heights of Jerusalem, declaiming, 'Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I long to gather you to me, like a mother hen gathers her chicks beneath her wings, but you wouldn't let me.' It says, so he cried openly at any daily sight, such as the far sight of his native city, which he loved. Yet he concealed something. Chesterton says, solemn supermen and imperial diplomatists are proud of restraining their anger. He says Jesus never restrained his anger. He flung furniture down the front steps of the temple. He asked men how they expected to escape hell, yet he restrained something. I say it with reverence. There was in that shattering personality a thread that must be called shyness. There was something that he hid from all people when he went up to a mountain to pray. There was something that he covered constantly by abrupt silence or impetuous isolation. There was some one thing that was too great for God to show us when he walked upon our earth. And I have sometimes fancied that it was his mirth. I have sometimes fancied that it was his mirth. Have you ever known people who smiled quite a lot? And they smiled in a certain way so that it looked like they knew a secret that nobody else knew. You might have run into people like that. They sort of have a kind of a wry way about them. I know something you don't know, and it's very pleasing to me. Well, Chesterton suggests that it is this joy that Christ has, which comes from his utter faith in God and in the power of God to do all things. And it's part of this that at the very brink of death, even though Jesus at Garden of Gethsemane, and you realize we're a week from Passion Sunday. Do you know that? It's amazing. What's Christmas going to be, 2 weeks from then? Everything is moving so fast this year. It's hard to understand. But next Sunday is Passion Sunday. And so Jesus, even when he goes to the Garden of Gethsemane and sweats blood in his anxiety, the Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass me by. And even when he says, my God, why have you abandoned me? In the suffering and pain of the cross, he still says, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. And so what he has done here, is reflect as before he even leaves to come to Bethany, he says, I'm going to wait. There's something people need to see. There's something they need to know. And it is the power of God. And so you have in the previous week's gospel, the man born blind who's being taunted by the Jewish leaders, the Pharisees, saying, you born blind and steeped in sin since your birth are trying to teach us. And what he was saying is, you don't know who this man is who opened my eyes, and you think he's not from God? That's ridiculous. Never in the history of the world, since the world began, has anyone been able to open the eyes of a person born blind. This man has to be from God. Otherwise, he couldn't do these things. Only God can do these things. This man must be from God. Of course, with that, they threw him out of the temple. So here you have the reaffirmation of that, where Martha and Mary say, even now, Lord, had you been here, my brother would never died. Even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him. When I used to hear about this scripture before, and it said, Martha came to see Jesus, but Mary stayed home, I thought it was because she was angry with Jesus. Jesus is coming. He should have come a couple days ago. You go see him, I'm not. But what happened is the scriptures make very clearly the fact that all these people were there with her. So she couldn't leave her company. When Martha sends word to Mary secretly, that Jesus is there, she then leaves, and everybody else who's with her presumes she's going to go to the tomb. And she's going to meet Jesus, and then Jesus says, show me where you've laid him, and then they go to the tomb. And together we have the gospel. So there is this whole idea of how do you feel if you're a person of faith? How do you face your Gethsemane? How do you face your suffering? What gets you by? And we always have the example that when something goes wrong, we say, why didn't God answer my prayer? It's true, isn't it? Lord, had you been here, it wouldn't have happened this way. God, had you heard me, this wouldn't have happened. And what happens is Jesus then says in this gospel, which he deliberately lets happen, so that the glory of God can be revealed. And he says, do you believe? And they both say, I do. I believe that you are the Christ who has come into the world. And then he says, roll back the stone. Now, we may think that our life is full of suffering. And in fact, in the old days of the church, when we used to talk about the difference between heaven and earth, we used to talk about earth as while we are here, mourning and weeping in this valley of tears. Remember that? Mourning and weeping in this valley of tears. Turn then, most gracious advocate, thine eyes of mercy towards us, and after this our exile, show unto us the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. But what this gospel tells us is, it is okay to believe, even in the midst of the things that we ask for that we don't get, because God has the final say. And with that sense of victory, which will come eventually, even if we have to wait for it, there is a sense of profound joy that we may not be able to experience every time we think of it, but that will surely overtake us. What did you think everybody felt like when Lazarus came out of the tomb and was returned? Hale and hearty, safe and sound. Bless you, praise you. God has visited his people. Same thing that they should have said when the man born blind got his sight. And some of the townspeople did that. Even the man born blind said that, But the Pharisees, who were steeped in religious tradition, didn't, because all they could see was the idea that a person was blind because they had sinned, or their parents had sinned, and this was God's justice. But the whole idea is that God does not will for our suffering. God did not make death. And as we approach in 2 weeks Easter, we remember the promised joy of all of it. Now you might say, well, where's God's mirth? Does God have a sense of humor? I'll ask you this. Why does the moon have a face on it?